It was a soundless awakening. No fanfare, no flashing lights. Just a slow hiss of oxygen and the soft hum of old machines stirring back to life, buried beneath miles of ash, steel, and time. The chamber opened like a cracked coffin, and inside, dust peeled from a man's body as his lungs pulled in air for the first time in nearly 1,000,000 years. His name was Grant, and he was the first. He didn't know that, not yet. Memory was a murky thing. He only remembered fragments, fire, screaming, the sky splitting open, Earth dying, then cold. A cold so absolute it felt like death had claimed him whole. But he wasn't dead. Somehow something had preserved him beneath the ruins of civilization. Grant stumbled out of the pod, naked, skin pale like old bone. Around him stood thousands more, silent chambers stacked in endless towers, all sealed, all pulsing faintly with life. The facility was still running. Grant found clothing first, military grade, standard issue from the 21st century's final war. His fingers moved on their own, muscle memory guiding him. Boots, gloves, armor. Then he walked, slowly, through the maze of hibernation pods and corridors that groaned under the weight of ancient dust. He didn't speak for hours, not until the facility's eye reactivated, flickering on with a sputter of light. Welcome back, Commander Grant. Date, 870,941 AD, Earth biosphere, unstable, galactic communication, offline. Status, humanity, unknown. That's when he knew. This wasn't a mistake. He had been meant to wake up. Only him. And maybe more. He hoped more. He climbed to the surface that day. The journey up took 4 hours through a cracked, decaying elevator shaft. The Earth above was not the world he remembered. It wasn't even Earth anymore. The skies were black and starless, choked with magnetic storms. The land stretched in pale gray dunes, broken only by the carcasses of cities buried deep under molten rock and silence. The stars were all wrong, and hanging in the sky, like a mocking crown, was something that didn't belong. A ring. A structure the size of Saturn's orbit, glowing faintly with blue light. It wasn't human. Grant knew that in his gut, and whoever had built it had no idea what they'd left buried beneath the crust of the dead world. He spent the next few weeks reactivating the facility, learning, watching old feeds, war logs, biometric data. Humanity had gone out fighting. The last war wasn't against themselves for once. It was against something else. Something that came from the dark. An empire that didn't want to conquer, only to cleanse, erase, rewrite. They had called them the Ordained. Grant couldn't remember their faces, but he remembered the screams, the fire, and he remembered what they did to Earth. He wasn't alone much longer. One by one, others began to wake. Soldiers, scientists, farmers, engineers. Not the rich, not the powerful, they were long gone. It was the survivors. The ones who volunteered for the fall protocol, to sleep beneath the planet until it was safe to rise again, until it was time to take back what was stolen. Grant became their leader not because he wanted to, but because no one else could carry the weight. His voice was the one they followed. His rage, the fire they needed to breathe. They called themselves the Revenant, and the galaxy would soon remember a name it had long tried to forget. Humanity. The underground base that had slept through 10,000 centuries pulsed with life again. Generators thrummed low like a heartbeat. Lights flickered down long corridors once haunted by silence. Grant stood at the heart of it all, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching as humanity's shattered remnants crawled out of time itself. There were 212 now, men and women alike, but it was the men who had risen faster, broken, bruised by dreams of burning skies, but hardened by the same thing that had always carried their species forward. Rage. A cold, focused fury that came not from hate alone, but from loss. Every man that stood before Grant had lost a world, and now the universe would pay for it. The scientists, what few of them remained, scoured the databanks. They spoke in hushed tones of radiation decay, stellar drift, and continental drift. Earth had shifted. What was once North America was now a fractured wasteland, sitting on an exposed mantle ridge. The oceans had boiled, then frozen. Life had vanished, except here. But Grant didn't need scientists to tell him what mattered most. Earth was dead, but humanity wasn't. He walked among the newly awakened, offering short nods, brief words. He wasn't a speech giver. Never had been. He was a war dog, bred in the back alleys of a dead city, raised in fire, baptized in war. And yet they looked at him like a savior. It unsettled him. "Commander," said Briggs, a former demolition specialist, now leader of the facility's reactivation team. "We found another vault, sealed, military-grade encryption. Might be another 1,000 in cryo down there." Grant's face didn't change, but inside, something shifted. Hope was a cruel thing. It gave you something to lose. "Show me." They moved through the bowels of the complex, deeper than most dared to go. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. The walls bore scars, blaster marks, melted steel. Whatever hit this place hadn't tried to kill them. It had tried to erase them, but humanity was too stubborn to die. The vault door stood like a tomb, massive and sealed by triple locks. Briggs keyed in the sequence. Nothing. "Locked from the inside," he muttered. Grant stepped forward, his gloved hand pressing against the cold alloy. "Then they're still alive?" That night Grant didn't sleep. He rarely did anymore. The dreams were worse than the waking world. In his sleep he saw his wife's face, her smile, her soft touch, and then the flash, the fire, the vacuum scream as their evacuation transport was torn from orbit. He'd made it to the bunker. She hadn't. Neither had the child she carried. He poured a drink, clear ethanol, made from reclaimed synthetic waste. It burned going down. He welcomed the pain. The following day they broke into the vault, not with code but with thermite and pressure drills. It took 12 hours. When the door finally gave, the room inside was a cathedral of ice and silence. Rows of pods, some shattered, some still humming. 183 survivors, men in military gear, hardened faces, beards frozen to their chests, officers, lieutenants, even a few commanders. But what caught Grant's attention was the symbol etched above the central pod. Project Revenant. Strike Cell 1. Grant felt something like recognition stir in his bones. These were not civilians, not sleepers. These were weapons, tools designed not to survive, but to avenge. They revived fast. Within hours, the new soldiers were armed, armored, and moving with a discipline the others lacked. Their leader, a thick-scarred man with dead eyes, stepped forward. "Commander Grant," he said, "I'm Colt. Revenant protocol confirmed. What's the mission status?" Grant stared at him. "Rebuild, retake, retaliate." Colt nodded once. "Good. We've been waiting a long damn time." With the Revenant strike unit active, the pace shifted. Order tightened. Drills began. Weapons were tested. What little remained. Old rail guns, plasma prototypes, EMP knives. Most were ancient, barely functional. But the will to fight? That was stronger than ever. Colt pulled Grant aside one evening. "You ever stop to ask who we're fighting?" "I remember enough," Grant said. "The Ordained." "Then you know they're still out there," Colt replied. "And they didn't stop with Earth." That gnawed at Grant's mind more than he let on. In 870,000 years, an empire like the Ordained could have conquered half the galaxy. Or more. But there were no signals, no warnings, no signs. Nothing but that ring in the sky. They had left Earth behind, abandoned it like trash. Grant made a decision. They had scavenged a single functioning satellite from the pre-fall era. Buried beneath the ice shelf, it was a miracle it even still existed. The techs rigged it for launch, and within days, it soared into the upper atmosphere, just high enough to get a full scan of the system. The data came back in pieces, but it was enough. Earth was alone. Every colony, from Mars to Europa to the stars beyond Alpha Centauri, was gone. Either destroyed or wiped clean. The moons bore scars of orbital bombardment. The rings of Saturn were shattered. The Luna bases? Vaporized. Nothing human had survived outside this single bunker. Colt was the first to speak. They didn't just defeat us. They tried to erase us. Grant's voice came low and cold. And they failed. The others heard. The phrase spread like fire in the dark. They failed. It became a mantra, a war cry, a reminder. The next step was clear. Leave Earth. The facility's engineers, what few they had, began repurposing ancient plans. There were blueprints for a ship once intended to evacuate the elite. It had never been completed, but the frame existed, buried under ice and rubble. They found it, dug it out, began to rebuild. They called her Vengeance. As the work began, more people woke. More vaults opened. The number grew, 500, then 6, 1,000. A new human race, scarred, angry, and determined, was crawling from the ashes of its own annihilation. But something else stirred too. The ring in the sky began to flicker. First it was small, a pulse, like a heartbeat. Then, days later, came the first sign of life outside Earth. A drone. Sleek, black, and silent, it entered Earth's atmosphere without resistance. It hovered over the base like a vulture. It said nothing. It didn't fire. It simply watched. Grant ordered it shot down. They tracked it with ancient surface-to-air batteries, hacked together by old-world engineers with shaking hands and haunted eyes. The missile struck true. The drone exploded in a flash of white and blue. The pieces rained down over the ruins, and then, 3 nights later, the sky lit up. Not fire, not war, but a message, a voice, cold, alien, and dripping with judgment. To those who awaken from the ash, you were warned. Your time is done. Return to your slumber, or be erased once more. The base fell into silence. Grant stood before the people, warriors, survivors, engineers, broken men clutching tools like weapons, and for the first time he spoke not as a soldier, but as a man who had seen death and chose to fight it anyway. They thought we'd sleep forever, that we'd never crawl back from what they did. But here we are, breathing, building, alive. He paced, eyes locking with the crowd. They fear us, or they wouldn't have come. They fear our rage, our memory, our humanity, and that's why we will rise, not just for Earth, not just for the past. His voice hardened. But for revenge. The crowd erupted, fists in the air, shouts, screams, echoes of a fury that had slumbered for 1,000,000 years. Colt stood beside him. You just declared war. Grant nodded. Number I just reminded them what it means to be human. The shipyard rose like a skeleton from the frozen crust of Earth. What was once a failed luxury ark project, buried under eons of ice and volcanic soot, now stood as the heartbeat of human resurgence. The Vengeance was nowhere near flight-ready. Her hull was torn. Her systems were pre-singularity tech, a mix of crude fusion engines and modular cannons made to be intimidating more than functional. But none of that mattered. She would fly, because Grant had decided she would. Every man in the yard bled for her. Engineers worked 20-hour shifts. Technicians rerouted rusted power grids and built new conduits from salvaged gear. Old AI cores were stitched together with analog components and cold logic. creating a ship that shouldn't function, but somehow did. Grant walked the corridors of the half-formed vessel each night. He didn't bark orders. He didn't demand progress updates. He was there to be seen, to remind them all of what they were building. It wasn't just a ship. It was a bullet aimed at the galaxy's skull. Colt approached him one night on the scaffolding above the bridge. The stars outside were starting to shine again. The magnetic storms were thinning, as if Earth herself was slowly catching her breath. "They'll come again," Colt said, arms folded, staring at the half-built control station. "You humiliated them. Shot their drone out of the sky. That wasn't a scout. That was a warning dog." Grant lit a thin metal smoke stick, manufactured from chemically grown fibers and synthetic ash. It smelled like burned rubber and dirt. He preferred it to clean air. "Good," he said. "Let them come." Colt didn't smile. He wasn't the kind of man who did, but his eyes flicked with approval. "Some of the younger ones, they're scared." "They should be," Grant replied. "Fear sharpens the knife." Colt nodded once, then pulled a small, blinking device from his coat. "We finished decrypting the drone's remains. The signal it used to communicate, it's not local. It came from the ring." The ring. That thing in orbit. The symbol of their exterminator's legacy. A construct beyond human comprehension, floating above the ruins of the very species they tried to erase. "What's in it?" Grant asked. "Don't know yet, but I can tell you this. It's not just a relay, it's alive." Adaptive Grant took a long drag from his stick, then crushed it against the metal railing. "Then we'll break it." The next day, the first real offensive plan was drawn. Grant called it Operation Wakefire. A strike mission, not into deep space, not yet, but to Luna. The moon had once been a hub of human civilization. If anything remained, databanks, tech, weapons, they needed it. And if it was silent, then it would be a testing ground. The Revenant squads suited up. 50 men, no more. Every one of them hand-picked. Not the smartest, not the fastest, but the angriest. The ones who didn't blink at death anymore. The ones who wanted it. Colt led them. Grant stayed behind. He didn't want to, but someone had to stay to finish the ship. The people followed his presence like gravity. Without it, the yard would collapse into uncertainty. He watched the dropship lift off from the crater, an old-world lander retrofitted with plasma drives and bolted hull plates. He didn't say goodbye. He never did. The trip to Luna took 16 hours. During that time, the ship's systems pinged off strange gravitational readings. Tiny fluctuations, shifts in mass that shouldn't be possible. Colt ignored them. He was focused on what waited on the surface. They landed in the old crater city of Silica Prime, or what was left of it. Towers lay broken, like the bones of a dead god. The solar fields were scattered and black. No signs of life, but no signs of decay either. Everything looked frozen. As the squad moved through the ruins, their scanners picked up heat signatures, faint, distant, flickering. Colt gave the order. "Weapons hot! Eyes open!" The first attack came from above. A shriek, not mechanical, not organic, but somewhere in between, echoed through the dead halls. Then came the motion. Fast. Bladed. A blur of limbs and light. One of the scouts, Merrick, was dead before he hit the ground. His helmet split like glass, his body convulsing. They were not alone. Colt dropped the thing that killed Merrick with a rail burst to the chest. It shattered in a spray of silver blood and metal shards. "A biofusion unit," the tech beside him muttered. "They left Guardians." They fought for hours in the dark. Every corridor brought new traps. Old codes didn't work. Doors refused to open unless hacked physically. Whatever lived here wasn't designed to keep humans out. It was meant to hunt them. By the time they reached the databanks, 12 men were dead. Another 6 were wounded. But the cores were intact. Ancient servers, crystal memory banks, a treasure trove. The techs plugged in, downloaded everything, maps, logs, recordings. One file made Colt stop cold. It was a video, dated just 3 months before the fall. A council meeting. The leaders of Earth. Grant was there. Younger, angrier, wearing the uniform of a man still fighting to keep the world intact. They were arguing, not over whether to fight, but how to die. The council had agreed to the hibernation project, but only for a few. The rest, billions, were left to burn. Grant had argued to arm every last soul on the planet. Make Earth a graveyard no enemy would survive. He had been overruled. Colt copied the footage, saved it, then torched the databanks. No one else would get this. They left Luna with heavy hearts and heavier cargo, but as they broke orbit, a ripple spread through the stars. The ring had noticed them. Back on Earth, Grant watched the feeds. The ship returned, scarred but successful. He embraced Colt without words. They were brothers now, bound by fire, not blood. But the good news didn't last long. 3 days after the Luna mission, the sky cracked. A fleet, not massive, not world-ending, but a message. 10 ships, sleek and silver, descended into Earth's orbit like specters. They bore no insignia, no symbols, only smooth hulls and the hum of energy beyond anything humanity had ever built. They sent no message, but their meaning was clear. They were here to finish what the ordained had started. Grant stood on the ridge above the shipyard, staring into the clouds as the first enemy ship breached the atmosphere. He didn't blink. He turned to his engineers. "How fast can Vengeance fly?" One of them, a girl no older than 20, shook her head. 3 more weeks minimum. We're still short a stabilizer and 2 thruster banks. Grant didn't flinch. "You've got 7 days. Colt stood beside him. "And if they don't wait that long?" Grant smiled. Just a little. The first smile in 1,000 years. "Then we remind them why they should have." The sky boiled with war. The enemy didn't announce themselves. They didn't give humanity the dignity of fear. Their arrival was methodical, like a farmer arriving to plow an overgrown field. Their 10 silver ships hung above Earth's atmosphere, still and silent, like blades waiting to fall. Grant knew what that meant. This wasn't a full-scale invasion, not yet. This was a purge, a final sweep, the kind of extermination a predator performs when it smells a wounded animal still breathing. "They think we're weak," he said to Colt as they studied the orbital feeds. "They're not afraid. That's going to change." Colt gave a cold nod. "Then we don't wait. We make the first move." The command center pulsed with tension. The engineers working on Vengeance had doubled shifts. No one slept. Men collapsed at their stations and were dragged aside, replaced without a word. Food was rationed. Ammo was handcrafted. Weapons that had no right to function were bolted together with spite and desperation. Grant gathered the core fighters in the war room. 59 remained from the Luna run. Another 100 had volunteered. Civilians, farmers, welders, people who once laid cable now held rifles. He didn't give them a speech. He gave them a choice. "You've seen the sky. You know what they are. You know what they came to do. This isn't about living. This is about sending a message. We don't need to win. We just need them to remember what it feels like to bleed." He looked them in the eyes, one by one. "Anyone who stays behind, no shame. You help finish the ship. That's our future. But those who come with me, we're writing the first chapter of the galaxy's worst nightmare." Not one man backed down. They called the assault plan Barbed Tongue. It was crude, reckless, human to its core. 3 ancient drop shuttles were rigged with old-world nukes, magnetized armor plates, and heat-masking fields. The idea wasn't to land. No one expected to survive that. The idea was to slam into one of the enemy vessels and rip its guts out from the inside. Grant took point. He wasn't a general, not anymore. He was a spearhead, and this spear was aimed at the heart of the enemy. The drop began just before dawn. Earth's fractured sky shimmered with auroras and blackened clouds. The silver ships above remained unmoved. Their confidence was absolute. It was their first mistake. The shuttles burned upward like metal fists, trailing fire and screams. The enemy didn't react until the last minute, firing sleek blue pulses that missed 2 and clipped 1. Grant's shuttle jerked hard, alarms screaming, hull integrity dropping. He didn't care. The moment they punched through the outer hull of the enemy ship, the world turned white. Metal shrieked. Fire spat in every direction. The drop doors blew open, and Grant led the charge into a corridor that looked more like a throat than a hallway. The ship was alive. Not in the breathing, pulsing way of sci-fi novels, but in the cold, calculated architecture of something that grew its own weapons. The first enemy he saw was tall, lean, silver-skinned, humanoid only in outline. Its face was smooth, featureless except for a vertical slit of black where eyes should have been. It moved fast. Grant moved faster. His railgun punched a hole through its chest, and it folded like paper. Behind it came 3 more. Then 10. They fought for every inch. The Revenants weren't trained for this kind of war. No one was. But they moved with purpose, with fury. They knew they were dead men, and dead men fight with a clarity the living never understand. Colt's voice crackled through the comms. Charge planted, Deck 5, moving to reactor. Grant grunted back, slicing through another silver monster with a salvaged plasma blade. Deck 3 here, hostiles heavy. Send backup if you've got it. No backup, came Colt's grim reply. This is the backup. Grant smiled bitterly. Of course it was. They fought for 2 hours inside the enemy ship. Every hallway was a trap. Every wall pulsed with defense systems. But they adapted. They learned. Human minds, flexible, dirty, vicious, always found a way. And then they reached the core. It wasn't a reactor. Not really. It was a heart, literal and figurative. A pulsing sphere of gravity-warped plasma suspended in a cage of bone-white tendrils. Grant looked at it, sweat and blood soaking his armor, and realized something horrifying. The ship wasn't just alive, it was conscious. He turned to his last demolition tech, a grizzled man named Thorn who used to build bridges for a living. Now he built death. You can kill it? Grant asked. Thorn nodded once. I don't know what it is, but I know what it hates. Metal, fire, pressure. Give me 3 minutes. Grant gave him 5. They held the chamber, burning through everything the ship threw at them. Exploding drones, shifting gravity, spikes from the floor. One by one, the squad fell. Grant kept firing, and when Thorn detonated the core, they didn't escape. They didn't run. They watched. The explosion was not fire, it was scream. A sound that echoed through the vacuum and shook the orbit of the other 9 ships. For the first time, those silver predators reacted. They recoiled. They retreated. They feared. Only 3 men made it back to Earth, dragged from a wrecked escape pod that had barely survived re-entry. Grant was one of them. His body was broken, ribs shattered, one eye blind, half his face torn by shrapnel, but his voice still worked, and when he stood before the crowd, he didn't need to speak. The sky spoke for him. One of the silver ships was gone, vaporized. The enemy had bled. The shipyard erupted in shouts, roars, howls. Men wept. They grabbed each other and screamed to the stars. The old enemy had come to erase them. Instead, they'd been marked by rage, marked by resistance, marked by humanity. In the days that followed, the enemy didn't strike again. They hovered above Earth, silent and still, watching, waiting. The engineers finished vengeance in 5 days, not 7. She wasn't pretty, she wasn't stable, but she flew. Her weapons worked, her engines screamed, and her bridge bore the mark of a species reborn. Grant stood at the helm, wrapped in bandages, supported by pain suppressants and sheer will. Colt stood beside him, quieter now. The fire in his eyes burned into something colder, something sharper. "You know what they'll do next," he said. Grant nodded. "They'll send the real fleet. Can we win?" "No," Grant said, "not yet." "Then what's the plan?" Grant stared out the viewport at the ring, that silent sentinel still pulsing with alien disdain. "We leave," he said. "We go to them. We show them what they missed, what they failed to kill." "And then?" Grant smiled, slow, pained, but full of purpose. "Then we remind them what it means to make humanity angry." Vengeance roared into orbit like an avenging ghost, trailing fire and human defiance in her wake. She wasn't pretty. She wasn't smooth. She wasn't blessed with alien tech or fancy quantum drives, but she was ours. And that made her dangerous. The moment she crossed the Karman line, the 9 remaining enemy vessels reacted. Not by attacking, but by withdrawing. Colt stood beside Grant at the command deck, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd expected a fight, not this eerie silence. "They're not scared," he said. "They're thinking." Grant grunted. "Good. Let them. Let them think about what we did with rusted steel and rage." Behind them, the bridge hummed with tension. Every man aboard knew the risks. Vengeance hadn't been tested. Half her systems were duct-taped miracles held together by hope and hate. But she flew, and she had teeth, makeshift cannons, scavenged missiles, and a core reactor that could rip a city in half if detonated properly. Destination. The ring. No one knew what waited inside, but if humanity was going to survive, it wouldn't be by waiting for the next extermination wave. Grant wasn't built for defense. He was a blunt instrument, meant for war, not preservation. "Plot a course to breach the ring's outer shell," he ordered. "Find me a hole. I don't care if it's microscopic. Widen it." "Sir," said the helmsman, a former shuttle pilot who used to smuggle reactor cores across frozen oceans. "We breach that, we don't come back." Grant didn't blink. "Then make the breach count." The crew worked in grim silence. These weren't soldiers from a time of honor or discipline. These were survivors, thieves, burned-out engineers, wounded killers. But what they lacked in polish, they made up for in hate. That was the core of vengeance, not glory, not freedom, retribution. The ring grew in the viewport. What once looked like a distant band of light now loomed like a wall, impossibly massive, orbiting Earth like a halo made of judgment and arrogance. Colt broke the silence. "They built that after the fall." "Yeah," Grant muttered. "Monument to a genocide, a message to the galaxy. We erased the wild dogs." "Except the dogs are back," Colt said. "Starving," Grant added, "and hungry for throats." As they approached, automated defenses lit up around the ring. Turrets, drones, satellite mines. It was a fortress, not just a symbol, a prison wall, a closed door. "Light 'em up," Grant said. The gunners went to work. Cannons screamed, launching homemade shells laced with antimatter. They weren't precision weapons, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to hit hard. Explosions lit up the void. Drones shattered like glass. Mines blinked out one by one. The ring began to respond. but not with force. Instead, it shifted. Entire sections turned, opened, like it was studying them, like it was inviting them in. Grant didn't flinch. "Drive through? If it's a trap, we'll die biting." Vengeance passed the threshold with a shudder. And then, silence. No alarms, no enemy ships, just a vast, cold corridor stretching deep into the ring's inner chamber. It looked almost like a city. Dark towers, suspended platforms, rivers of pulsing light. "Scan it," Colt ordered. The techs hesitated. "We're being scanned ourselves, every cell, every atom. It's not sensors, it's consciousness." Grant stepped forward. "Broadcast wide band." The comms crackled. The transmission went out. "This is Commander Grant of Earth. Humanity is not dead. You failed. We're coming for answers, and if you don't give them, we'll take them." No response. But the corridor lit up, one path illuminated by soft blue light, leading deeper. "They're baiting us," Colt muttered. "I know," Grant said. "That's why we bring the biggest damn guns we've got." They landed on a platform in the ring's interior. A recon team disembarked first. Colt, Grant, and 5 soldiers. They moved through metal halls that hummed with alien life. The walls shifted subtly, reacting to their presence. At the chamber's heart, they found what they never expected. A human, or something close. He stood tall, dressed in white robes, face smooth, untouched by time or pain, but his eyes, cold, golden, ancient, were not those of a man. "Welcome," he said in perfect English. Colt raised his rifle. Grant stopped him. "Who the hell are you?" Grant asked. The figure smiled. "I am a construct, a voice. I was made to answer one question. What if they wake up?" Grant stepped forward. "We're not here for riddles. You wiped out our people, burned our world. Now you act like this is diplomacy?" The figure cocked its head. "Your people were violent, unstable. The Ordained considered you a biological threat. Emotion weaponized, evolution without ethics." "You mean we scared them?" Colt growled. The figure didn't deny it. "You won battles you should not have. Your adaptability, your rage, it frightened the galaxy. Your extinction was approved." "But you failed," Grant said. "Yes," the figure replied. "A miscalculation, one we intend to correct." A wall opened behind it, revealing thousands of pods. Inside each, a human. Not dead, sleeping. Men, women, children. "They weren't killed," Colt whispered. "They were taken." The figure nodded. "Some were preserved for study, others for eventual reconditioning. The Ordained believed a few could be taught restraint." Grant's fists clenched. "We don't want your pity. We don't want peace." The figure's voice lowered. "Then you want war? Again?" "No," Grant said. "We want revenge." He raised his gun. The figure didn't move. "If you fire, the ring will retaliate. Your ship will be erased." Grant hesitated. But not for long. He pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the figure's forehead. It didn't bleed. It didn't scream. It simply shattered, revealing wires and light beneath. The ring screamed. Sirens blared. Platforms trembled. Drones erupted from hidden walls. Colt roared. "Move!" They fought their way back, tearing through metal beasts and machines that bled light. The squad lost 2 before they reached the shuttle. Vengeance fired support rounds, clearing a path. The moment they were aboard, Grant gave the order. "Detonate the core we planted in the corridor. Let's give them something to remember us by." The explosion ripped through the inner ring. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to damage it, enough to mark it. Vengeance punched out at maximum burn, chased by enemy fire. But they made it. They returned to Earth, battered, bloodied, and victorious. They had gone into the lion's den and left it wounded. Back at the base, the people watched vengeance land. They saw the burns, the holes, the scars, and they cheered. Not because it was over, but because it had begun. Vengeance sat in the crater like a wounded beast, scorched, rattling, steaming from a dozen punctures in her armored hide. But she was alive. She had bled the enemy and come home, defiant. The people gathered around her like disciples at the feet of a god. Not because she was beautiful, not because she promised safety, but because she had proven a terrible truth. Humanity could still hurt the universe. Inside the command bunker, Grant stood shirtless under the harsh blue light, his torso a tapestry of bruises, bandages, and burns. A medic stitched his left arm with slow, deliberate precision. He barely noticed. Colt paced across the room, eyes locked on the monitors showing the ring. The explosion they'd triggered had damaged part of its outer corridor, visible even from orbit. It now spun unevenly, like a wounded predator licking its wounds. "They'll retaliate," Colt said. "I hope so," Grant replied. Colt frowned. "Hope isn't a strategy." "No," Grant said. "But rage is." The medic finished the final stitch and stepped away. Grant pulled his shirt over his bandages, wincing. "What did we recover from the ring?" The data core was on a secured table nearby. It pulsed with strange light, alien but readable, thanks to the scavenged tech they'd pulled from the Luna core. The engineers decoded it in pieces. Each fragment revealed more of the truth, the one the galaxy had buried. The Ordained hadn't just feared humans. They had studied them, obsessed over them. They documented humanity's wars, psychology, philosophies. They admired and despised in equal measure. And when humanity proved it could kill the immortal, they panicked. The extermination wasn't tactical, it was emotional. "They feared what we could become," one tech whispered, "so they ended us before we got there." But they hadn't. Not completely. And now the galaxy would pay for their hesitation. 2 days later, the sky changed again. The enemy returned. Not ships this time. A broadcast, a galaxy-wide message, hijacking every frequency, every channel still active in the solar system. The face that appeared wasn't human. It had no features. Just shifting waves of silver light forming something approximating expression. You were given mercy. You were meant to vanish quietly, without suffering. But you chose violence. Now you will have it. Grant watched the broadcast in silence. When it ended, he said nothing. Instead, he walked to the central square, climbed onto the wreckage of an old gun turret, and addressed the people himself. No cameras, no script, just fire. "They've shown their hand. They want fear. They want submission. They think we're still the broken animals they burned 1,000,000 years ago." He looked around at the faces, hollowed by loss, hardened by survival. "They don't understand what we are now. We're not a race anymore. We're a wound, and wounds fester. Wounds infect. We're going to spread through their systems like a virus with teeth." He raised his fist. "They gave us extinction. We'll give them legacy, a legacy of fear." That night, the plan took form. They wouldn't wait for the enemy to send another fleet. They'd strike first. A beacon had been activated inside the ring. A gateway, a slipstream path to other star systems. It had been used by the Ordained to move quickly, quietly, wiping out resistance before it could take root. Now, it would become humanity's highway to revenge. The engineers called it suicide. The scientists called it madness. Grant called it necessary. They rearmed Vengeance, reinforced her hull, installed a salvaged alien drive scavenged from the ring's inner walls. It wasn't perfect. It might tear the ship apart, but it would send them through. Their destination? Veltrax 9. A minor colony, formerly human, now under Ordained control. Rumors from the data core suggested prisoners, survivors, slaves. It was enough. Colt pulled Grant aside before departure. "You know what we're walking into? They'll be ready this time." "They've always been ready," Grant said, "but they've never been scared. That's what we change." The departure was unceremonious. No parades, no tears, just steel grinding, engines roaring, and 1,000 eyes watching as the last warship of humanity launched into the black. The jump was instantaneous, painful, wrong. Space folded, time blinked. When Vengeance emerged into the Veltrax system, it was chaos from the start. Ordained warships waited in orbit, circling a gray planet like vultures. But they hadn't expected suicide. Vengeance didn't slow. She burned into the system at full speed, guns blazing, scattering torpedoes into the void like meteors. She didn't target warships. Not at first. She went for infrastructure. Communications, supply lines, defense grids, every shot a message. "We're not here to win. We're here to ruin." The warships responded fast. Too fast. They converged, surrounding Vengeance like sharks. On the bridge, alarms screamed. Fires broke out. The starboard stabilizers failed. They were going down. Grant didn't panic. He ordered the helmsman to crash. Not land. Crash. The ship plowed into the upper atmosphere of Veltrax 9, engines melting, hull boiling. It didn't stop. It cut a scar into the planet's surface 10 miles wide, and then it opened fire again. Colt led the ground team, dozens of revenants charging into enemy bunkers with rail guns, flamers, and fury. They weren't soldiers. They were ghosts with guns. The local ordained garrison fell into disarray. They hadn't expected an attack, much less a human one. Panic spread through their ranks like wildfire. Grant moved through the battlefield like a man possessed, burned, bleeding, grinning with every kill, and when they reached the prison compound, they found them. Humans, real ones, weak, sick, mutated by centuries of gene therapy and labor. But alive. Colt's voice cracked. They lied. They didn't kill everyone. Grant knelt beside a boy no older than 6. His eyes glowed faintly, modified by ordained tech. But he flinched when Grant touched his face, like a beaten animal. "They made pets of us," Grant whispered. Then louder to his squad, "No survivors among the jailers. No mercy. The battle turned from a strike to a cleansing. They burned every facility, every laboratory, every drone. When the last bunker fell, the skies above began to change. The warships fled. The ordained ran. And humanity stood victorious, bloody, broken, but standing. Vengeance was wrecked. She wouldn't fly again. But she didn't need to. She had delivered them. And now Veltrax 9 had a new name. New Earth. The fires of Veltrax 9 burned for 7 straight days. Black columns of smoke twisted through the sky like the last screams of the ordained. Their pristine halls, once cold and bright, now lay shattered and defiled. Human banners, crude and made from torn scraps, hung over their temples. Blood soaked the ground where machines once ruled. But it wasn't victory that sat heavy on Grant's shoulders. It was clarity. War had always been survival. Now, it was doctrine. Grant stood over the ruins of what had been the central control node of the prison compound. Beneath his boots, fractured alien steel glowed faintly, as if it still resisted its fate. A child, no older than 10, clung to his leg silently. The boy didn't speak. Hadn't since they freed him. His fingers were cybernetic, grafted bone and synthetic metal, a slave tool. Colt walked up, his armor charred and dented, face split open along the cheek, stitched with staples and ash. "It's spreading," he said, voice gravel. "Systems beyond Veltrax are getting the signal. Pirates, rebels, old colonies, they're starting to stir." "About time," Grant muttered. The Ordained are scrambling fleets, Colt added. We won't have long. Don't need long, Grant replied. Just enough to make sure when they kill us, they choke on our names. Colt reached into his jacket and pulled out a data pad. We've got another lead. Not a prison this time. Something else. A tomb. Grant raised an eyebrow. Explain. Colt tapped the screen. Back before Earth fell, there was a secret human colony, hidden beyond the Sagittarius spiral. They called it Bastion. Off-grid. Tech no one else had. Underground movement. They were building something. Something like a ship? Grant asked. More like insurance. Grant's jaw tightened. Coordinates? Colt handed them over. It'll take weeks to reach it, months if we can't salvage parts, but the signals still ping. The Ordained haven't touched it. Either they don't know about it, or they're afraid of it, Grant finished. That night, the Revenants gathered. Not all who fought survived Veltrax. 37 were lost, another 50 wounded. The civilians they had freed, over 400, sat silently, watching the fire-lit ceremony as the names of the dead were read by Colt, voice like sandpaper over gravel. When the last name echoed out into the ash-choked wind, Grant spoke. These men weren't heroes. They didn't die for medals or glory. They died because rage demands a price. They died because survival isn't enough. He paused. Living without vengeance is just slow surrender. The next day, they built. The wreckage of vengeance was torn apart, repurposed. Engineers worked through the night, stripping metal, fusing frames. A new ship was born, smaller, leaner, fast. They called her Wrath. She wasn't meant for defense. She was meant to hunt. With the surviving techs, they installed what they could from the alien data cores. Drives that bent space around them, cloaking devices that masked them from deep scans. Human ingenuity met alien arrogance, and the result was a ship built for annihilation. Grant stood at the helm again, with Colt at his side. The child, the one with metal fingers, remained close, silent, always watching. The boy had no name, no past, just eyes too old for his face and hands that trembled when idle. Grant didn't send him away. The boy had seen, and that made him one of them. The ship lifted off with a roar that shook the planet's spine. Civilians cheered. The newly freed raised fists. Survivors wept. They weren't just escaping anymore. They were coming for the stars. Their jump through the Bastion gate was smoother, cleaner. They'd learned the alien drive now, understood its rage. The journey took 6 days, and on the 7th, they saw it. Bastion. It wasn't a colony. It was a city ship buried inside an asteroid field, carved into the stone itself, armored with ancient alloys, powered by fusion cores still burning after 1,000,000 years. But it wasn't abandoned. It was sealed. Grant piloted Wrath close, scanning. The surface was silent. But the readings were clear. There was life inside. Still. Somehow. We wake them, he said. Colt nodded. What if they're not friendly? Grant's voice dropped. Then we remind them what time it is. The boarding team broke through the outer wall and found the interior frozen in time. Streets of steel and carbon, buildings powered down, holograms blinking in loops. And then they found the chamber. Massive, circular, filled with pods, humans, thousands, men, warriors, scientists, civilians, sleeper units buried here before Earth's fall. Those who had fled in secret, who had refused to trust the Council, who had built this as a backup. And at the center, a terminal, locked with DNA protocol. Grant stepped forward. The system lit up. Commander designation recognized. Grant. Protocol Omega initiated. The pods began to open, one by one. Grant turned to Colt. We're not alone anymore. Colt smiled, the scar on his cheek stretching. Then it's time the galaxy remembered who they tried to bury. The bastion pods hissed open like breath after suffocation. Thick vapors spilled out. Pale hands twitched. Chests heaved. Men who had been silent for over 1,000,000 years began to move. They were older than time now, frozen before Earth's fall and forgotten beneath layers of fear and betrayal. They awoke not to peace, but to purpose. Grant watched from the terminal, arms folded, the glow of Bastion's mainframe casting shadows across his face. These were no civilians. They were the last sons of the unbroken generation, those who had rejected surrender and vanished into the stars with blueprints and grudges. Their leader emerged from the deepest chamber. He wasn't armored, not yet. He wore only a black coat with the Earth insignia stitched in red across the chest. He had no name, just a title etched across the chamber walls. Warden. He looked at Grant with hard eyes and spoke in a voice that made every man nearby straighten their back. "You're the last survivor?" "No," Grant said. "I'm the first revenant." The warden didn't smile. He nodded once. "Then we begin." In the days that followed, Bastion burned back to life. Engines hummed. Lights returned to corridors dark for 10,000 centuries. The forges reopened, melting alien steel and reforging weapons not built for war, but for extinction. The humans of Bastion were not gentle. They didn't weep over history. They didn't mourn lost cities or sing of peace. They built ships. They built arsenals. They built retribution. Wrath was just the beginning. Now they had the numbers, the mines, the hidden caches left behind by a civilization that had refused to believe in death. Colt stood beside Grant on Bastion's outer platform, watching the black sky flicker with new construction. "This isn't resistance anymore," he said. "This is escalation." Grant nodded. "We're not sending messages. We're sending a warning. The galaxy thought we were extinct." "They're going to wish we were," Colt muttered. 1 week after Bastion woke, they launched their first true offensive. 3 ships, all human, names etched in fire: Wrath, Revenant, Judgment. Each carried a strike team, not massive forces, not armies, but specialists, men who had seen Earth die and refused to let memory die with it. Their first target was a world named Elian Prime, once a trading hub, now an ordained spire, pulsing with artificial thought. They didn't announce themselves. They descended like comets. 3 cities burned in the first hour. The defenders scrambled. Their machines, perfect, sterile, algorithmically cruel, weren't ready for rage. They weren't ready for the illogical fury of humanity's return. Grant led the assault himself. He moved through fire like it belonged to him, his rifle speaking in bursts of judgment. Beside him, Colt mowed down security drones with a grin like death made flesh. And when they reached the planet's control spire, they didn't hack it. They dropped charges and buried the structure in its own arrogance. The final explosion was visible from orbit, a blossom of light in the shape of a fist. As Wrath pulled away from the ruined planet, transmissions began to pour in from fringe colonies. Whispers, questions. Is it true? Are the humans really back? Was it really them who destroyed Elian? They didn't answer. They didn't need to, because fear answered for them. On Bastion, new leaders emerged. Men from the old cryopods who had once commanded fleets, designed weapons, written war doctrine now lost to history. They called themselves the Ash Council. They didn't debate morality. They didn't argue over diplomacy. They focused on a single creed. If they tried to erase us, then we will burn our names into the walls of their stars. Grant was offered a seat at the table. He refused. "I'm not here to sit. I'm here to break." Instead, he took the mantle of something older, something deeper. Executor, the blade of the new human machine. Colt became his second, his hammer, his wrath incarnate. The boy with metal fingers, silent, always watching, remained by Grant's side. Still nameless, still small, but no longer afraid. He had started to build tiny machines, drones made of scrap and pain. He called them echoes. When Grant asked what they were for, the boy simply said, "To follow. To follow you." By the second month, humanity's resurgence had spread to 9 systems. Not through conquest, through ruin. Every world they touched was left burning, every spire toppled, every ordained outpost shattered, and always the same message carved into walls, burned into skies, hacked into comms. "We remember Earth." The ordained finally responded, with a fleet, a real one, thousands of ships, armored, perfect, impossibly advanced. They surrounded Bastion like gods descending on a termite mound. The Ash Council braced for annihilation. Grant stood on the outer deck, watching their sensors light up like a constellation of hate. Colt joined him, blood-stained and grinning. "Looks like they're ready to finish it." "Let them try," Grant said. The warden appeared, flanked by 2 armored lieutenants. "They've deployed command drones. They want to talk." "Of course they do," Grant muttered. "They're afraid again." The drone landed in the heart of Bastion's square. It projected a face, cold, silver, featureless. "You were meant to be erased. Your return is an abomination. Surrender, and you may live." Grant stepped forward. No weapons, just his voice. "You killed our world, burned our skies. You erased our history." He leaned in. "And we're still here." The drone replied, "You cannot win." Grant smirked. "We're not trying to win. We're here to make you lose." And then he snapped his fingers. The boy released the echoes. Thousands of tiny drones scattered across Bastion, across the fleet. Built in silence, unnoticed, they activated all at once. EMP pulses, hacked systems, screams of metal. The ordained fleet shuddered. In space, their ships began to falter, collapse. Cannons shut down, shields dropped, engines died, and then humanity fired back. The battle wasn't fair. It wasn't just war, it was vengeance. Hours later, the skies were silent again. Wreckage drifted. Human ships burned, but Bastion stood, and humanity stood with it, bruised, scarred, but undeniable. That night, Grant stood before the people, blood on his coat, fire in his eyes. "They tried to wipe us out. They tried to forget us, and now?" He raised his voice. "Now the stars whisper our name. They scream it. They fear it." He paused. "We are not a race anymore. We are a reckoning. We are the storm they tried to drown." He turned to the sky. "To every world that stood silent, that watched us burn, we're coming." And the galaxy would never recover.